This is Sarah Squires bringing you behind the headlines in today's edition of WyoToday Newsroom. Today, I am joined on the show by Representative Harriet Hageman. Welcome to the show, Representative.
Sarah, thank you for having me on again. I always enjoy visiting with you.
Well, likewise. Thank you so much as well. Today, I wanted to kind of hone in on an issue here that's making a lot of headlines. It has to do with, our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. I know we've got some troops that are reportedly there, working to restore order, and there's an effort to kind of regain some congressional authority over the District of Columbia. What can you tell us, Representative Hageman, about what's going on the ground there and what is needed?
Well, so as so many of your listeners probably recognize, under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, it actually states that it's called the seat of government doctrine, and it grants plenary authority, legislative authority to Congress over the District of Columbia as the federal capital. Our founding fathers wanted the nation's capital to be free from disproportionate influence of any single state and the influence of states generally. So when people start talking about making the District of Columbia another state, we would actually have to modify the Constitution to do so. And I don't think that would make any sense whatsoever for all of the obvious reasons, but we don't need to talk about that today. But what that means is that Congress really does have legislative oversight over Washington, D.C. However, in 1973, Congress granted the D.C. limited what they call home rule authority through the District of Columbia Self-Government Reorganization Act. We refer to that sometimes as the Home Rule Act. And what it did is, while it reserved for Congress the right to come in and oversee what's going on in D.C., it really granted a lot more authority to the city council and the mayor structure, which is probably what people have seen over the last several years. But now, with the incredible crime that has been happening in Washington, D.C. over the last several years, the president has rightfully pointed out that it's necessary to make a change. So there's a couple of things that we've been doing. I have been working with some of my colleagues to adopt statutes that actually provide not more authority, because we have the authority right now under the Constitution, but that further defines what authority the D.C. City Council has. There's just a couple of examples of things that they've been trying to do. For example, in an effort to try to be able to act in secret without either congressional knowledge or knowledge of the president of what's going on in the city council has actually attempted to amend their Public Meetings Act so that they don't actually have to meet in public. They can meet in secret and undertake actions in secret and then hide them from us so that we don't have the ability to overturn them. Obviously, that is very contrary to the very foundation of our country and clearly in violation of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. So those are the kinds of things that we are attempting to fix. As far as what the president has done, even Muriel Bowser has publicly stated that the president's actions in surging National Guard into Washington, D.C. has been effective at reducing crime. I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of different people, especially those who live around the Capitol campus. They've noticed a substantial decrease in loitering. They have seen a decrease in the mobs that have kind of taken over Navy Yard during certain times of the day. So I think it's having a huge impact, a very positive one.
Yeah, it's couldn't be farther from Wyoming, I think, in a lot of ways. But glad to hear an update on what's going on there and the work that's underway. Another thing that I think is pretty timely here to discuss, Representative Hageman, is the Great American Outdoors Act, which we know is set to expire here. It's a pretty important thing in this part of the country in terms of, support for our national parks. And I know that you joined the House Natural Resources Committee for a recent hearing at Grand Teton National Park to kind of go over the future. That meeting has also generated a lot of headlines, and I'm wondering if we can get your perspective on some of those key issues and what you see ahead for the next chapter.
Well, it was a fabulous hearing last week in the Grand Teton National Park. If you've seen the photographs we had the Grand Tetons as the backdrop because we held the hearing outside. The witnesses were wonderful. Chip Jenkins is the superintendent of the Grand Teton National Park, and then we had 4 other witnesses, some who are in the business community and some who are in the community of supporting our national park services. The Great American Outdoors Act was done under the first Trump administration, and the Congress at that time appropriated substantial funds, about $1.9 billion per year, for maintenance, addressing maintenance backlog, addressing transportation, addressing infrastructure. And the money, I believe, has actually been very wisely spent. I think we can do better at it. I think we can do better. One of the things that we learned during the hearing, for example, is that because of the procurement and contracting policies of the federal government, we end up losing anywhere from up to as much as 35% of those funds in what I would say is unnecessary spending, whereas that money could better go to roads and building bathrooms and making the national park experience much more positive for the citizens. So I think that there's some improvement that can be made, and that was what was so wonderful about the witnesses that testified last week, is that they described that on the ground what they think some of the changes are that could be made. And again, I'm going to give some kudos to Chip, to the superintendent of the Grand Teton National Park. He's giving us detail as to what he thinks needs to happen. Now, keep in mind, in this last reconciliation package, while the reauthorization is up and we need to reauthorize the Great American Outdoors Act, in the reconciliation package, we appropriated $16 billion for another 8 years for the Great American Outdoors Act. So with those additional funds and over the next 8 years, I am hopeful that we can catch up on much of the backlog, the maintenance backlog, and also start improving some of actually improve the infrastructure in some of our national parks. We also need to focus the money where the money should be spent. And I'm going to throw a criticism at Nancy Pelosi and the way money was spent over the last couple of years. That is $200 million went to the Presidio, which is in Nancy Pelosi's district out in San Francisco, which is, in large part a homeless encampment. Well, that $200 million could have gone a lot further if it had been dedicated to the Grand Teton National Park or Yellowstone or Fort Laramie, for that matter. So we need to make sure that the money is being properly spent, but I do think it's a good program. I think there's a lot of support for it, and Congress definitely supports it.
So, Representative Hageman, what are the next steps here? Where do we go, from here for the Great American Outdoors Act, and what's to follow?
So the money has been spent, and one of the things that we're doing right now with the reauthorization, and the purpose of the field hearing was to gather the information and the ideas of what we can do statutorily to change that law to make it more effective. So that's really the next step. We've had the hearing. We're in the process of drafting the bills for the reauthorization, and that will include the changes that should make this law and the funding more effective.
I see. All right. Well, we will absolutely keep an eye on that issue. Of course, it's incredibly important to a lot of Wyoming here and our reliance on national parks and tourism and keeping them healthy. So thank you for your work on that issue. And I wanted to go over one other piece of legislation that I know is your bill. It's called the Coal Act, and it aims to expedite leasing for certain coal projects and to remove some moratoriums that are kind of holding us or keeping us at bay from utilizing that coal. So can you kind of explain to us what this bill entails and how that would impact us here in Wyoming?
Yes, I was excited to spend some time on the floor last week describing and talking about Wyoming's coal industry. We have been the leading coal-producing state since 1986, and in 2024, we produced 191 million tons of coal and shipped 171 million of those tons to 26 other states. Wyoming produces about 40% of the nation's coal and about 85% of all federal coal production. So obviously, this is such an important resource for our state. The president issued an executive order called Reinvigorating America's Beautiful Clean Coal Industry. and amending the OBBBA. And so this has really been one of the most pro-coal administrations that I've probably seen in my lifetime, at least since Ronald Reagan. And it's really exciting. I have been saying for years that coal is the energy of the future. I have refused to take to heart the doomsdayers and the naysayers who have claimed that coal is a thing of the past. It isn't. It's a very efficient form of energy. It's an affordable form of energy. It's reliable. We need it to power our country. So what the Coal Act does is it codifies key aspects of President Trump's executive order, and it also nullifies the Department of Interior Secretary order that placed a moratorium on new federal coal leases. That's the one that would affect, the Powder River Basin, the Buffalo RMP, the Miles City RMP. Essentially what we're doing is we're lifting these moratoria so that we can actually proceed with coal production and meet the demand of the American businesses and citizens. All you need to do is compare America to other countries around the world, and those countries that have sought to go to the net zero nonsense, the global warming nonsense, the climate change nonsense, they have largely deindustrialized. And you look at countries like Great Britain and Germany and France, and they're not just in the doldrums, they're destroying their own economies. Germany, 3 of the premier cars in the history of the world, Mercedes, BMW, and Volkswagen, they're having to pull out of Germany because they cannot manufacture cars there with the rules and regulations they're putting in place over this obsession with net zero. Coal is affordable, it's reliable. Our economy is absolutely running circles around those other economies around the world, and it's in large part because of our affordable, reliable energy. And coal is a very important part of that. We need it for the data centers, for AI. If we're going to stay at the forefront of those things, it's imperative that we have and use coal. Just in one area, in the Miles City part of the Powder River Basin, they have enough coal for almost 75 years. Just there, just in that one area. That doesn't even count Wyoming. I just had that statistic from some other things I was doing earlier this week. So this is an exciting time for coal, and I'm working with Senator Cynthia Lummis on this on the Senate side. And I'm excited that we're moving forward with shoring up and providing some certainty to that industry.
Well, thank you so much for your work on that issue. Before we go here, Representative Hageman, I wanted to ask you, I think a lot of us watch national politics really closely, but, some of us maybe once in a while feel like we're kind of hitting max capacity and we just kind of have to turn it off for a little bit and focus our energy closer to home. But sometimes I think us regular folks have some good ideas or some keen insight here on the ground. And I know that your office is really well known for being very responsive when constituents reach out. So can you tell us a little bit about what the process looks like when an idea, whether it comes from a regular constituent here at home or from some other place, when you get that kernel of an idea on an issue, what does it look like behind the scenes as that takes shape and becomes a piece of legislation? Can you kind of fill us in on that process when it, in those early stages? What steps do you take when you've got an idea and you think this is really something that Congress should act on?
That's a very interesting question and very insightful. So it's actually happened numerous times that we have taken ideas from our constituents and moved forward to either working directly with agencies to resolve a problem in the state of Wyoming or actually drafting legislation to resolve it as well. We have a variety of ways that we interact with our constituents, including Congress in your community. And that's where my staff goes into a particular community, spends an entire day, and people can make appointments, and whether it's at the local library or maybe the county commissioner's office, I don't know where it would be, but we have a variety of places where they just sit there and people make appointments and come and sit down. And sometimes they talk about their own personal issues, which, by the way, as of the end of August, we have been able to recover $8.5 million for the citizens of Wyoming that was wrongfully being held by a variety of federal agencies, whether it's the IRS or you need reimbursement for veterans care, whatever it may be. We've solved over 3,000 cases for Wyoming citizens, and we've recovered $8.5 million in the last 2.5 years. Part of that comes through Congress in your community where people come and talk to my staff. But other ways is people will call me directly. I have, so many friends and contacts and family members in Wyoming, and I've had people just call me up and say, Harriet, I've got an issue with this. I had one constituent who called and was talking about all of the FAA regulations related to bush pilots. And he said the different things that they're trying to do to the people who are out here on ranches, monitoring their livestock and water situation and that sort of thing. They have all kinds of restrictions of what we can do in terms of assessing whether we can take off or not. And he said it's actually making it more dangerous. So we were able to get involved in that, and we got a piece of legislation. It was a part of a broader piece of legislation, but we got a statutory change to allow these folks to actually be safer in the way that they deal with being able to take off sometimes in adverse conditions. So those are the kinds of things as people will stop me on the street or at the state fair and say, hey, I've been thinking about this. What do you do? And what I'll do is I'll write it down, or I'll have them send me a text or an email, and I'll come back and sit down with my staff and say, I was in Douglas, Wyoming, and somebody asked me to address this. Can we look into it? And oftentimes we first contact the agency that's involved, because typically there is one, and we ask questions about what is the problem here, what needs to be addressed. Is this something that can just be addressed on a one-on-one basis, or do we need to make a statutory change or a regulatory change? There are times we actually work with the agencies to change their own regulations to make sure that they're being more responsive to our constituents and the citizens of this great country. So there's a variety of ways that the information comes to me. Sometimes they're good ideas, and we've had some really good ideas come out of Wyoming. And there are just a variety of ways that people can bring that information, but then I work with my staff to develop the language, and then we tweak it, and then sometimes we'll work with the person who had the idea in the first place and say, is this what you're looking for? We work with legislative counsel, and then we go to the leadership in our committees. I'm on natural resource and judiciary, so we'll go to leadership and say, hey, we've got an idea to do X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that? And then we'll start developing it, and we'll start working to get co-sponsors. And then we'll eventually, hopefully, put it on the floor.
Representative Hageman, I think in listening to you kind of lay out that process and some of the experiences that you've had in working with constituents, I had one really central thought, and it was that this is how democracy is supposed to work. And so I think for our listeners, if you're listening at home, if you're, on your commute this morning while you're driving to work, this is your sign. We've got a Congresswoman here, a Representative Harriet Hageman, who really does listen to us and who brings our issues straight to Washington, D.C. And she works to problem solve on our behalf. And I'll tell you, as someone who has worked and lived in several other states, that's not often the case. So I think we're incredibly fortunate here to have you working on our behalf, Representative Hageman. And I also want to thank you, as always, for taking some time today to join me and reach out, over the airwaves to your constituents. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And that was really kind of you to say. I really do believe that I'm a servant of the people. My job here is to protect you. And there are times that some of our constituents may have had an issue with an agency, and maybe our constituents maybe did something a little wrong or something. I still feel I need to be an advocate for people. That's what my role is. That's what my job is. And I have the best staff in the entire world. I can't do this without them, and they just do such phenomenal work, and they're so dedicated to Wyoming. And it's really been an honor and a pretty exciting thing to be involved with.
Well, we are seeing that here on the ground here and feel very fortunate as well. So thank you once again for joining us here on WyoToday Newsroom. And we'll look forward to our update next month when we get to sit down with you again, Representative Hageman. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye-bye.